Back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Robert C. O'Brien. Ambassador O'Brien is the National Security Advisor. I also disclose he's an old friend of mine, a former law partner. Welcome back, Ambassador O'Brien. Great to have you on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thank you, Hugh.
You gave a speech in Arizona yesterday. I talked to Josh Rogan of the Washington Post about it, comparing General Secretary Xi of the Chinese Communist Party to Joseph Stalin. What did you intend to provoke out of China by doing that?
Well, the comparison I made is between the Chinese Communist Party and the former Soviet Communist Party, and the point I made is one that's been made by academics, and that is that the Chinese Communist Party is the only ruling communist party that has never officially broken with Stalinism. So it's a Marxist-Leninist party. They've never broke with Stalin. In the PLA, People's Liberation Army Museum, there's a statue of Stalin. So I said, look, we have to understand that the Chinese state is run by a communist party that's Marxist, Leninist, and Stalinist, and that's something they proclaim. That's not me attaching labels to them. That's just talking about their own ideology and their own doctrine.
Now, when I hear Stalinist, Robert C. O'Brien, I think of Darkness at Noon. I think of the Gulag. I also think of the Uyghurs in the concentration camps in China. General Secretary Xi is ruthless. If he's anything, can President Trump do deals with him?
Well, President Trump's a pretty tough guy himself, and look, we certainly showed that we could do a deal with China on the Phase 1 deal. But remember, that deal only came because President Trump did something that no other president has done in 40 years. He imposed significant tariffs on China. He imposed a cost on China for their unfair trade practices that they've engaged in for many, many years, taking upwards of $500 billion a year out of our economy, killing our manufacturing base in this country. And so President Trump put the sanctions on, or put the tariffs on, and as a result of the tariffs, we were able to get a deal. But there's, this is not just about trade. I mean, this is about Chinese access to our capital markets. It's about the rampant theft of intellectual property. It's about China reaching out beyond its borders to try and silence Americans, like they did with the general manager of the Houston Rockets, who tweeted about Hong Kong. So the Chinese are active across all domains, and so we're taking very measured steps to deal with the Chinese and protect Americans.
Ambassador O'Brien, 6 months ago, America had the greatest economy it had ever enjoyed. We are now in a recession, though we're coming out of it. Does President Trump blame General Secretary Xi for what happened to our economy?
I don't think he blames Xi personally, but I think what he has said is that this plague, the COVID virus, the Wuhan pneumonia, as the Chinese used to label it before they went back and rewrote their history and rewrote their labels for the disease, this came from China. There was no cooperation from China early on. They didn't allow CDC doctors in. They still haven't given samples of the virus to us. They've thwarted investigations into the origin and spread of the virus. And the virus came through the United States. It ripped through here. It killed over 120,000 Americans. It destroyed trillions of dollars in value. And so we've got there's a real problem with the Chinese right now, and I think every American recognizes that, not just President Trump.
Now, Josh Rogan described the administration as split between Panda huggers and Panda sluggers. Secretary Pompeo and you are clearly in the slugger department. Secretary Mnuchin is suggested by Jim Talent to be in the hugger department. To whom does the president pay greatest attention among these two camps?
Yeah, I reject those labels. I don't think they're Panda huggers or sluggers. I think they're a bunch of great Americans working in the administration who are seeking to keep the American people safe and protect our economy. And there may be a divergence of views on one issue or other, but I think there's a clear-eyed view by everyone, including Secretary Mnuchin and certainly Mike Pompeo, myself, and others, that we have to address this Chinese threat, the threat brought by the Chinese Communist Party to these shores, and we have to do it in a clear-eyed, rational manner, and we'll be taking steps. The Treasury Department will be taking steps. Commerce Department will be taking steps. We already have in a number of areas to address that threat. And I think there's a lot of unanimity across the cabinet on that front.
Ought the news media to be trusting Chinese numbers about the extent and location of the coronavirus in the People's Republic of China today?
Well, let me ask you this. If a country expelled the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post from their country, if they censor every bit of information that shows up on their social media platforms like WeChat, if they attempt to censor people even overseas in free countries, can you trust them? I mean, that's the question. So that's a pretty easy answer. I think it's hard to trust anything that's coming out of official state organs in China at this point. Again, we call on the Chinese to open the doors on the origin and the spread of this virus. The Australians asked for a neutral international investigation into COVID, and instead of working with the Australians, their neighbor in the Pacific, the Chinese put 80% tariffs on barley to punish them for even calling for an independent investigation of what happened.
Now, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, who served both President Obama and President George W. Bush, said on this program on Tuesday that we are in Cold War II, and indeed this one is more dangerous. Do you agree with that assessment, Robert O'Brien?
I don't want to call it a Cold War right now, but I do think that Secretary Gates is correct in that this is the greatest geopolitical challenge this country's faced at a minimum since the 30s, but perhaps ever. I mean, China is a massive country with over 1 billion free people. They're hardworking, they're smart, and they are incredibly motivated to obtain dominance in the world. They want to be the number one world power. They believe in a common destiny for mankind, which is Communist Party speak for everybody pays tribute in one way or the other, ideologically or with money or by stepping aside to allow the Chinese to have their will, not just in the Asia Pacific region, but across the world. So it's a massive challenge. I think Secretary Gates has properly characterized it. And but look, the United States we're pretty good too, and we haven't lost one of these things, whether it was to Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan or Soviet Russia. The American people are pretty innovative, pretty hardworking, and pretty smart as well. So I'd always bet on the United States of America.
When you sit down with President Trump and you're doing the bilaterals or you're listening to him do bilateral conversations with world leaders, how often is China on the table as a discussion point, Ambassador O'Brien?
Look, it's always on the discussion, especially since the rise of the COVID virus, the spread of the COVID virus, which came from China, there was an initial cover-up of the virus that cost the world months in responding to the virus. There was a cover-up by China with respect to the WHO, which prevented proper information on the virus from getting out for at least a month or two. And that had an impact in tens of thousands of American lives and lives around the world. So certainly every world leader is talking to President Trump about China. We have different, look, we could walk and chew gum at the same time. We have different agendas around the world on various issues, and President Trump covers those. But I can tell you almost every country has been affected by COVID. The feeling of world leaders, whatever they say publicly, privately, they're extraordinarily concerned about China. They're extraordinarily concerned about the spread of this virus, and they're turning to President Trump as the leader of the free world to advise them and to lead them and to ensure that America is on the right side of this, and we are. And President Trump is rallying folks in a quiet, private fashion around the world to address both COVID, but also to make sure that this never happens again.
In the tradition of national security advisors, you don't do politics, but you can opine on the difference in policy you would expect were Joe Biden to replace Donald Trump in the Oval come January. I don't think that's going to happen. If it did, how would that impact policy towards China, in your view, Ambassador O'Brien?
Well, look, I expect the president to be reelected and reelected overwhelmingly. I see some of these polls and get a chuckle out of them. Look, we're an evenly divided country. The last 3 or 4 elections have all been very close. Even President Obama's reelection was a close reelection. So it's an evenly divided country, and I think it's going to be a close, hotly contested race, but I think the president's going to come out on top. The American people see the leadership that he's providing, not just with respect to China. They saw him build the greatest economy in the history of the world. We took a very bad hit because of this virus that came from China. But who do you want to turn to rebuild the economy? The guy who's proven he can do it, President Trump, or somebody who's been in Washington for 40 years. So I think the president's going to be reelected, and I think the American people are going to rally around him.
I want to ask you about one of your predecessors, and it's not John Bolton, it's General Michael Flynn. The president said this in the Oval Office yesterday, cut number 2.
Happy about General Flynn. He was treated horribly. He was treated very, very horribly by a group of very bad people, and I think you'll see things are going to start to come out. But what happened to General Flynn should never happen again in our country. He was persecuted, and many other people were persecuted. They spied on a campaign, and they should never spy on a campaign to put it.
Stop right there. Ambassador O'Brien, if you're the national security advisor during a transition, can you imagine countenancing what Team Obama not only countenanced but approved of, and it is now clear Vice President Biden was complicit and James Comey was at. Would you ever participate in such a thing?
Of course not. Look, I've like you, who I've spent my whole life practicing law as a lawyer. I've had great faith in the institutions of justice and the court system in this country, and I'll tell you, my faith's been bolstered and renewed seeing what the appellate court did in throwing out this terrible guilty verdict that the FBI obtained from Gen.Flynn. What happened to Gen.Flynn shouldn't happen to any American in any investigation. I think Attorney General Barr is doing a great job reforming the Justice Department, reforming the FBI, and what happened can't happen again. And certainly it can't. I mean, that shouldn't happen in any investigation, any crime. But it certainly shouldn't happen in a political campaign where there's no crime, there's just a political difference. And once we start using the criminal justice system to go after political opponents, that's a slippery slope that leads to a very dark place for this country. So I'm just heartened by what the Court of Appeals did, and the D.C. Circuit, and we've got some great judges on that circuit, and it took a lot of courage for those judges to call out the corrupt officials that were involved in that Flynn investigation, and I'm proud of the D.C. Circuit for sure.
Last question. You have significantly shrunk the National Security Council back to pre-George W. Bush sizes. You had your critics. Half of your directors are now women, which is a big accomplishment no one noticed. Has the team that went wrongly or participated in the persecution of Michael Flynn, are they all gone?
You know, look, we shrunk the National Security Council to get the best and brightest and put ourselves in a position where we could be effective and efficient, and that's working very well. We didn't have any political litmus test on our staffing of the National Security Council. We just wanted to put together the best group of people we could to do a great job for the president, for the country. So I can tell you that for whatever reason, the number of leaks and some of the acrimony that may have existed is gone, but our decisions were made just on merit at the National Security Council.
Ambassador O'Brien, thank you for joining me. Thank you for a significant speech in Phoenix yesterday. I appreciate your calling out the Chinese for exactly what they are, a Marxist-Leninist party. I wish more people understood the Chinese Communist Party. You can do a deal with them, but remember, Lenin said they will sell us the rope. We cannot sell them the rope again. Don't go anywhere, America. Coming back for